We are in bed with books. Thank you for joining us this week. I'm Melissa.
And I'm Bethany. If you'd like to find us outside of wherever you're listening from, then you can find us on our website, inbedwithbookspod.com, on Instagram at inbedwithbookspod, and find us on YouTube for video versions of the podcast and bonus episodes.
So let's jump right in.
Today is a good day because I get to talk about my favorite book, which is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I am the ritual obsessive Piscean in me is just loving this because I have my mug that is I am Heathcliff.
Aww.
Wuthering Heights from the Bronte parsonage that I visited when I was in London. It's full of wine, but
yeah.
I know I was like tea wine. It's like wine. It's a good night.
Yeah.
So yeah. How was your experience?
Well, this is the second time now that I'm reading it. Mm-hmm. No, third. I don't know. It is. I've read it less than Frankenstein. I know that.
Right.
I love it. I mean, I love like a toxic literary man. It's my biggest red flag. Possibly why I've been single for so long, but I don't think that's a problem. It's complex. That toxic, like the.
You don't have to get into your personal.
No. Well, it's on its
toxic.
Own is it's hard because like it's written as this kind of just like shadow version of like a Jane Austen novel. And so you so want it to go, even though I know what's happening and I know how it's going to turn out. Like I still hope that I'll read the next page and Catherine won't be terrible. And like Heathcliff, his revenge won't be around every like corner, but it's so good because of that as well. I'm going to say something, and I want you to know that I say this with like the best intentions. In some ways, it reminds me of like Jersey Shore. Like the conflict between Heathcliff, Catherine, and Edgar, and Isabella, kind of like the back and forth, she's screaming at both of them, she locks them all in the kitchen together, like
it's
this is not this is not normal. It's so good. I love that part. Like I'm not saying that is a bad thing at all.
It's like the drama, like
yes
theatrics of it.
The theatrics very much so. Yep.
And that comes from Cathy.
Yeah.
And Heath, I mean, yeah.
Heathcliff definitely has like the dramatic entrances and the dramatic like reveals, but Cathy has like dramatic everything. She doesn't get her way and she's like, I will perish now, thank you.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
The gall. The audacity of this girl.
I know. This time around too, and the last time I read it, I was like, you know what? I want to read it again, and I want to really focus on Cathy because she's a bit of an enigma. Like popular culture, what everyone knows is Heathcliff, right? And then Cathy's just kind of this woman, this girl that he's obsessed with, and she's obsessed with him, and and like what obviously her role is the one that makes the first mistake, right? And makes the ultimate, like it continues to make until she does make the ultimate mistake, which is choosing Edgar, because the first mistake she made was choosing to be around Edgar more, thus right creating the bridge between her and Heathcliff. But what's interesting is and we can kind of talk about Cathy, I guess, right now, which is,
yeah,
part of me like doesn't want to believe that she's a narcissist, but I think she is.
oh
Like,
yeah,
I can't, like, because
like
part of me
I
is
don't
like,
want her to be.
well, like, part of me is like, it can't be that simple. Like, I want her to be a bit of more of like a less of a, like, I don't want her to be shitty, and
Yeah,
she is.
yeah.
Like,
I do think that goes back to that, like, it in the very beginning, it's framed very much like a Jane Austen marriage plot. And at every turn, and a lot of times it is Cathy making these wrong choices, like quote unquote wrong choices. It's moving farther and farther away from what we know to, or like what we think we know to be the marriage plot, which is her and Heathcliff, these childhood friends. They've grown up together. They, as she says, like, they're made from the same pieces of the universe, but they don't end up together. And it's because of the little actions she takes along the way. And so we want her to be better because we know what she's, like, quote unquote, supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. She's not following the rules of like the
Exactly.
love story.
That's what's so frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So she, like, half of my book is just me like writing like what the fuck is she doing and why, and like,
yes,
because I want her
yes.
like I want her to be more complex than that.
Yeah.
But she actually becomes a little simple. But I like the positioning of it though, right? Because when you first read like the story, at least for me, like it was all about like you were just so like disturbed by Heathcliff that you kind of it kind of overshadows like Cathy's role in it a little bit. So then you kind of have to read it again and pick through and be like, oh no, yeah, like she was the first one, right? Da, da, da. And then like now so then she becomes almost disappointing. Yeah. And not in like a, oh, she disappointed us by making the wrong decision, but she's disappointing in that she's not what she wants to be. She's not what she wants to be. She let herself down, right? Like she broke her own heart, which broke Heathcliff's heart and murdered her and then him and then all of these things. Yeah. So yeah, she's interesting.
I agree that she's a narcissist, but I think it also comes down to like her being spoiled.
Yeah, I think she
because I well, I kept trying to wrap my mind around the Edgar marriage, especially. Well, and I think we also need to mention just kind of like the caveat that this is all told through Nellie, who admits more than once that she doesn't like Catherine.
Yeah.
Even as she's trying to like stay by her side through like her like depleting health and everything.
She has to because she's her lady. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Like she openly admits to not liking her. So I try to keep that like narrator sentiment in mind. But the conversation that they have after Edgar proposes, which is like that whole sequence of events also kind of proves how selfish she is, because in some way she had to have manipulated him into an engagement after openly slapping him, like openly lying in front of him and then lying about lying. Like that whole kitchen scene is really, really like fucked up on Cathy's part. But she says that she's like marrying Edgar for Heathcliff, which I would argue is like a lie.
It's a cop out.
Yeah, exactly. Like a huge cop out. I think she's just more worried. This scene really made me think about her as this like unrepentant like Emma. She's so worried about her reputation, about her place within the community, that she's marrying Edgar and then using Heathcliff as like the justification, even though she would much rather like in her heart have Heathcliff.
Through her condescension of
yes,
she has to condescend. Yeah, it's condescending. Yep. And
she openly says that she could never marry Heathcliff because of his place it's not like she doesn't allude to it. She doesn't like ignore that subject. She just says it point blank, like it's like the weather. So she really made me think of like Emma before her transformation, but imagine she never got that transformation. Imagine she just got progressively worse. Yeah. That's how I felt about Cathy.
Yeah, Cathy is Emma gone wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the spoiling that people will do for her or do to her really does not help.
Yeah. I organized, I feel like this book in particular can be best organized in scenes because a lot of the depth and the crux of the story happens in conversations with Nellie, which before we get into the scenes, I do want to take a moment and talk about Nellie because she's like, I named my doll after her when I was little. I remember. I love Nellie, and there's not really much we get about her, but I just love her. Like her presence is so felt, like throughout this entire story. And it's a really interesting because she's the housekeeper. She's essentially the same age as Heathcliff and Cathy, or whereabouts. Yeah. And she grows up with the family. She is, when, like you said, there's that scene in the kitchen. There's like this very domestic perspective that you get on like what's going on. So you get these intimate conversations that Cathy has with her, that Heathcliff has with her, that Nellie happens to be in the room while, you know, they're embracing and things like that. So, you know, she has like has a really interesting perspective, but also isn't impartial to what's going on. Yeah. She has like she said several times, like, Cathy's mischievous, wayward. She's, you know, she like gets assaulted by Cathy. Yeah. And what's interesting is you even see Nellie kind of lean a little bit more towards Heathcliff and like have sympathies with him, and even imagines for Heathcliff, like, if you just changed like how you thought about yourself, you could change like a bit more about like how people think about you, which I thought was kind of interesting. And so you can tell she really cared about him and wanted him to succeed. Let me like pull up my notes here a minute. But she says like both separate times she could not have imagined Heathcliff so violent. And she also says she could not have imagined Cathy so selfish. So like she saw their childhood and did not see what was coming.
Yeah. Well, I think Nellie, like, the choice of having a servant, first of all, was a great choice for the very reasons that you're stating, where we get that kind of like that domestic side. It really blurs that public and private, because she'll tell us like what's happening in the public, but then, or she'll kind of give like the private side to what happened in the public sphere, if that makes sense. So like you've got Edgar who's falling in love with Cathy, but for like the life of us, we can't really see why. We know he is, but we're seeing the private where Cathy's actually quite terrible. And then you see like after their father dies, and Hindley takes like not ownership, but what do you say when his kids?
He inherits.
Thank you. Inheritance of the kids. The way that like Heathcliff's treatment changes. So you know that like to the public, it had to have been a very suspicious thing to be going on, to have this little, they repeatedly call him a gypsy, which is already a questionable term to begin with. But this kind of like interloper, I think, isn't one of the words that Nellie uses for him. Even when she's like admitting that she likes him, she calls him this interloper. And so we get the like the inside view, that private view of what it's like to have that figure. And I think that's why she starts to kind of open up to him, because she sees even her like her own prejudices, which I imagine are being more reflected out in the public sphere. The public is much more implied at this point, which is kind of like the reverse of things usually, like of these kinds of like, not gothic, but sorry, the romantic.
Mm-hmm.
You get a lot more of the public than you do the private, and so I like that flip-flop.
Yeah, it's really Hindley's treatment of Heathcliff is really the only, I feel like, the outside, because we don't really speak to Hindley much. And so, and then the society that comes with having like the Lintons over, and that whole scene of like, you don't touch me, like I'm dirty kind of thing. And then him smashing the thing. It's super awesome.
Well, what I also liked, and I just kind of, this just popped into my brain as well, is that when the Lintons first start calling, it's always in the kitchens when they show up.
Yes.
It always goes to the kitchens, which is not a public space.
Yes.
So they're regularly,
I made that note too.
Yes. When we first go to Wuthering Heights, when it's like Lockwood and he's finally like he's meeting everybody for the first time, that's in public spaces. But Nellie's retelling is not, and that has one, a lot to do with the fact that she's a servant, but two, why were they in those spaces to begin with?
Yeah, a lot of scenes happen in the kitchen. That was this Nellie's kind of an observation and interpretation of the house as well. Like, she's really proud when they're all decorated for Christmas, and she talks about like all of the china and like, the wreaths and everything smelling good, and it's such a cheerful house. And then the Lintons come over and they have like a thing, right? And then later when she's checking up on Isabella, she's just like, I mean, if a woman lives here, you might as well sweep. Like she's she's looking at like that part of the house, which I think, which represents the happiness of the inhabitants. Like it's just a really cool like way of approaching the story. But to kind of talk about like the private and public a little bit more, is something that has definitely been commented on as a big theme with this story is the boundaries, right? Which is also a very Gothic thing. But there doesn't seem to be much going on outside of Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange. And anything that does happen is incredibly mysterious, and we don't really know. And just like, it's like people just kind of walk off into a mist. like nothing exists. It's like a vacuum. Like,
no, it is. Yeah.
It's incredible. So like Isabella goes to London, but we don't really know where or why or how. And and like Heathcliff goes and comes back like mysteriously, like with money.
We don't know how he got his fortune or where he was.
So it's kind of this like the world definitely centers around Wuthering Heights. It's just like, it's fascinating.
One of my favorite ways that they kind of emphasize that is when little Catherine falls over the wall and she can't get back in. And like, it was like she lost her hat, I think it was, in the garden, and so she tries to like reach up a tree to grab it, and then she comes down, but she comes down on the outside wall, and they like can't get the key to let her back into the garden. And I found that really odd, because like, one, Nellie 100% should have a key,
right?
Because she's the lady. She's like the lady, the maid. Thank you, lady's maid. Thank you, me. But also like, just walk around to the front. You know what I mean? Like, but she's like, because she's now stepped out, kind of like outside of the bounds of like the house, it's just like chaos.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like it's confusion. She like the normal solution, just like, oh dang, gotta walk to the front now, like isn't a real solution for her.
Right.
And so kind of like, yeah, what's that like?
The
Oh,
almost
it's like,
incarcerative like
yes,
quality
yes,
to it. Yeah.
yeah. Um, and even though most of the story obviously happens about them, even Lockwood gets that at the very beginning. He gets stuck in Wuthering Heights.
Yeah. Yeah, it's remote. It's I don't want to say it's tumultuous.
Yeah,
It's just like not it's unpredictable. Um
like the Moors themselves trapped him there because of the
yeah.
snow. Yeah.
Yeah. Um before moving on from Nellie though, I
Mm-hmm.
love how because first upon reading this you're like, "Oh, it's their servant, like she doesn't have you kind of come with your own like
Yeah.
predetermined idea of what that is. Especially another piece of this is it's in Yorkshire, it's in the moors, which in the 19th century was this like really remote, like it's not London. So
Yeah.
they're all vagrants, like kind of
Yeah.
mentality, which is why when Lockwood comes in, he's from the South and he's just doesn't understand what's going on. Like, and that's
Yeah.
why Nellie's telling him this tale and he's just completely beguiled by it.
And that's why
But
Isabella marries two of her cousins.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Everyone's marrying each other. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like the boonies.
Yeah.
I love she tells Lockwood, I think it's around the time when he sits her down to like tell him more gossip, as like they put it, I think
Yeah.
jokingly. Um but there's something reserved about her that you believe like she's not a gossip. Um
Mm-hmm.
and I like she kind of gives a bit of a like she may not be educated or traveled, but she presents herself. She says, I certainly esteem myself a steady, reasonable kind of body. Not exactly from living among the hills and seeing one set of faces and one set series of actions from year's end to year's end, but I have undergone sharp discipline which has taught me wisdom. And then I have read more than you would fancy, Mr. Lockwood. And I kind of like that she gets like a little bit of like a chance to
Yeah.
like plead that she's like not superstitious. She's not
Mm-hmm.
like, because you'll find throughout the book that she starts getting freaked out by like Heathcliff, by like Cathy, by their
Mm-hmm.
interactions. But like, that like just because we're remote doesn't mean like I'm sitting here like waiting for ghosts to come around every corner. Like that's
Yeah.
not how this story started. Like,
Yeah.
which I kind of
Well,
appreciated.
and I think too, like she was basically raised with them
Mm-hmm.
and they had good educations.
Yeah.
So it could be assumed easily that she
Right.
also had a good education.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, she learned to read and
Yeah.
she knew her numbers. She was teaching Hareton before he left.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, she was definitely educated.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like, so I wanted to kind of go through like that scene with her and Cathy, because I call it Cathy's confession. Because it is like, has some beautiful language in it.
It does. It does. Here, I'll get my book. We
Even
can
though
be
it's
on
Cathy.
similar pages. Yes.
What copy do you have?
Naturally, I have the Norton Critical
Yes, of
Edition.
course you do.
It
I have
is the
Penguin.
fourth edition. Nice, nice.
Nice.
This one has the reviews, essays, yada yada. It's got some Bronte poems as well.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah. Okay, what chapter and like?
I think it's volume 1, chapter 9.
Okay.
It's around the 70s usually. Page number 70s. What I find interesting is, and this is why I struggle so much with Cathy, as we all do,
Mm-hmm.
is because Nellie, as much as she says, you know, Cathy's screams or Cathy's cries are louder than everyone else's, like she's just a dramatic little shit, right?
Yeah.
And then she has these moments where she's incredibly human. And so there's, what does she say? Catherine had an unusual gloom in her aspect that made me dread something from which I might shape a prophecy and foresee a fearful catastrophe. So this is where like you start to break down like this isn't just, she's not just squealing because she's upset. Like there's something really mountainous happening underneath it all. Which I like because then it makes the gravity of what's happening obviously more. I mean, there's just so many good parts, but I've reread them so many times I have commit them to memory almost. But I love of course it's a famous one. I've dreamt in my life dreams that have stayed with me ever after and changed my ideas. They've gone through and through me like wine through water and altered the color of my mind. And this one, I'm going to tell it, but take care not to smile at any part of it. Is gorgeous. And that's where like the poetry just really comes through, I feel like.
Yeah.
But this is the first like real like scene that we have that really drives home the connection that her and Heathcliff have.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know that they spend a lot of time in the moors. Obviously, oh yeah, they're pretty close, but this is like a little too close. Like, well,
especially because like it's never fully clarified if they're related. Because it is heavily implied that he could be like a bastard of Cathy's father.
I've never heard that. Interesting.
I mean, I have, obviously, and I've never been able to like decide one way or the other whether or not I agree or not. I don't think it necessarily changes my reading of their love story because it is such like a fraught one. It's definitely like, especially after this, like the confessional scene where it's like both of y'all need just to move on. He spends 3 years plotting revenge and she leaves him, she betrays him. Like it's not a healthy thing. It's like you wouldn't want people on Jersey Shore to like actually stay together because it's so like, because it's so dramatic. It's always the theatrics. It's like that's not what love is. They see this like intense, the bonding that they get under was more specifically like under Hindley's tyranny as some kind of like truer passion, when in reality it's like not healthy.
No, it's definitely obsession. And there's a bit of the throughout the book in Heathcliff and Cathy's speech about one another, this blurring of one from the other. You have in this scene, my great miseries in this world have been Heathcliff's miseries. Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same. Like there's this very much this like lack of boundary between where one begins, and it's indistinguishable, right? Sometimes. And I love obviously in a lot of other scenes too, they talk about, I am not like you in murdering, in killing yourself, have murdered me. Like,
Yeah.
I love my murderer, but yours, I cannot. Like, so it's like this weird, like where there's almost 4 of them sometimes because because there's the one that fucked up, and then there's the one that they love, and then the murderer that fucked up. So there's the murderer and then the one that they love. And it's just
they both like acknowledge the real one and then the one that they've got on a pedestal, but they refuse to reconcile the fact that like the pedestal isn't real.
Yeah.
And that's not to say I don't love this story. I absolutely love this story because it is so human. That like that codependence with them is so relatable. That need to find solace in a person like that, to that level. Like we all want to find somebody that, even though it's not healthy, that we can like lose those boundaries with. The temptation in that kind of like connection is overwhelming.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why we're still reading it 2 centuries later.
I agree. I think like we romanticize it a bit. This obsession, right? The dark, the soul, our souls are fused together. I can't live without my life. I can't live without my soul. This feeling of being so fused with the other is super romantic, but it's killing them. Like, this is not love. This is not a fanciful love story at all.
Yeah, no, not at all. Like, it's not a love story, but it is romantic.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, they don't say love very often.
No.
I was like reading it and I was like, I don't think they've said they loved each other yet. She literally, this scene is just like this big long speech about how she loves him, but she doesn't say it. I think a little later
because you can't love what is like a part of you,
Yeah, it's not part of the language of what's actually going on, right? Like, when she's forming these words, it's coming from like the necessity of the rocks beneath,
yeah. And that's also why why they keep going back to each other too, is they come from a household where that conflict was huge. Not to get like all psychological about it, but like they're repeating those same unhealthy coping mechanisms, unhealthy relational dynamics with each other. They each marry one of the Lintons, and what happens? These people are actually like relatively healthy, and they don't do those things, and so they return to each other. Yeah, exactly. They return to each other again and again, trying to do this, trying to like recreate that conflict, that excitement, and then like all of them die as a result.
Yeah.
Heathcliff, granted, years and years later, but it's still like it's the loss of that fight that seems to kind of like drive out his life force.
Yeah. What was I gonna say? Sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, that makes me think of something, but I don't want to like skip that far ahead like yet.
Do it.
Okay. This time around reading, I was very much like taken with the second generation more than before. The book does lull a bit, like after like Cathy dies, you're like, okay, the stars of the show are like now like gone.
Yeah.
And now what? Like, and so, but it
everyone's so calm.
I know. There's no theatrics.
Where's the drama?
But one I really enjoyed Hareton and Cathy together.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but I was like, I don't know if I was just horny or like
okay.
But I was like, I think the way in which it was written, like you could tell like there was definitely like it felt kind of like a romance in that way.
Yeah, for them.
Like she clearly like describes Hareton as being like attractive and like Catherine as being like sought after. Even Lockwood's like, I fell in love with her. Like, okay, buddy. Like, it's like, you saw
like, did you not hear the story?
I know.
Were you not here? Were we not hearing the same thing here?
Yeah.
Too dumb.
But they're like, you know, and it was clear that like she was trying to build them up into like this like into like this romantic relationship that was actually healthy and going in a good place.
Yeah.
Not out of necessity, right? But out of love. And what love looks like is different. And it's almost like, so Heathcliff's, the more their relationship grows, Hareton and Catherine, like the more like they are getting along, the more it like assembles his like revenge, his vengefulness. And it's like replaced this like really like angry, horrific like part of the house that has been there for so long. Like they replace it with love. Like Catherine literally just comes in and is just like, your what does she say? She says you're miserable, like, and that's why you're so terrible. Like, and you know, I forgive that fact. And I love how much she just like stands up to him. Like she's not afraid of him anymore. And I just love that, because he's like, you know, he's kind of wilting a bit.
Yes. So
he's getting
very good.
He's getting more and more like pale. Like he's just like not there anymore. But like, I love that. So Hareton, his inability to read, right, is like the degradation. Mm-hmm. It's the same theme, but she deals with it so much differently. Yeah. She teases him about it, but not because she wishes he could read, but because she wants to get his attention. Like, yeah.
And then when she realizes that like it's actually hurting him, she's like, oh, sorry, let me actually just teach you.
Yeah.
And they have this like cute where she's just like
little meet cute.
Yeah, essentially, because like up until that point, I mean, we find out that when she had first moved into to Wuthering Heights, all of the servants, everyone in the house had been ordered to be mean to her. Mm-hmm. Because that was supposed to be like another act of like revenge against them, was to also take revenge against the kids. So Hareton is not allowed to like learn. He has to like work for his keep there. Technically, not Isabella. Catherine was supposed to as well, but she doesn't really. She kind of just, she talks about like learning witchcraft and stuff to piss off Joseph, but that's about it. She just sits in the corner reading the same book over and over. But like that moment when he kind of admits that it's pissing him off is when they actually have their meet cute, because like they actually meet each other for the first time as people, mm-hmm. not as like these two people subjected to mm-hmm. Heathcliff's revenge that they have no reason to be getting.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because she hates him because she thinks he's like in on it. And then there's the moment where he's like, I did not take part. And mm-hmm. she was like, oh. And then and then they have their like little moment. It's really sweet.
Yeah, it is cute.
Yeah.
Also because like she married Linton.
Yeah. Oh, okay. That's so sad.
That
whole thing. Like he was a little cruel bastard, but I understand why. You know, like he was being used so bad. Like that scene when they're like down, like when they're supposed to like meet halfway and they're like mm-hmm. down on the hill, like below the hill, and he's just like convulsing and like crying and like he's like coughing and like he can't. They're like, are you okay? Like you should be in bed.
He's like, my health is improving, and they leave and they're like, I don't know if really we should trust him, which is fair.
Just a ghoul.
Yeah. I mean,
we laugh, but I was genuinely disturbed Like, I was just like,
yeah,
this is hard to read.
It is very disturbing. Kind of thinking about like lineage.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like it's questionable because Heathcliff is described as being this like broad, he's like strong, he incites fear in Edgar very easily. But Linton is like very, very weak.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that like he's not Heathcliff's son, but that like what you have is like the interloper procreating with somebody who's like actually English, actually from Yorkshire, from like their region, and creating something that's like not tenable.
Mm-hmm.
But then you've got little Catherine and Hareton, who are both from fully English people. Because even like Heathcliff arrived and he didn't even speak English.
Yeah.
So we know he's from somewhere else or he's from some other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that kind of like, yikes, but like, don't intermingle, kind of like, don't bring in this otherness, because it doesn't do well to mix the bloods like that.
Well, what I find interesting is that Hareton becomes the most like Heathcliff.
Yeah.
Like, and there's the scene after someone's funeral. I don't know. Someone died.
One of the funerals.
Edgar, I think. Or
okay.
I don't. Yeah. And he says, "You're mine now. Let's see how like crooked the tree grows," or whatever like
Ooh,
that.
yeah.
Like, yeah, he literally says,
Hindley?
"Oh yeah, Hindley dies." Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And to Hareton he says, "You're mine now." And then Hareton becomes like Heathcliff becomes a father to him, and he actually grieves his loss and loves him. And
well, because from
Linton,
the beginning too. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, from like their first introduction, Heathcliff wasn't mean to him. He like wanted Hindley to see Hareton like him more.
Right. Yeah.
And so he teaches Hareton to like cuss at his dad. He teaches him bad words. He like creates a little menace.
He creates a brute out of him.
Yeah.
There's this really interesting quote, which I was like, that's interesting, where Heathcliff is talking to Nellie, of course, about Linton and Hareton. And when he speaks of them, he says, like, it's hard to tell who he's talking about because he doesn't say their names, but he says, "Mine is this." Yeah. And then you realize he's talking about Hareton. And then he says that one, which is Linton, which is actually his. So there's this interesting, like, he definitely feels ownership over Hareton as like his son, maybe not his heir, because obviously he can't be, but even though he is the heir of Wuthering Heights, Hareton is.
Yeah. But I think that's only because the others died first.
Yeah, like Hindley, he was Hindley's son. And so, yeah, Hindley, he inherited it from Hindley. And
well, no, because Heathcliff got it because of the gambling debts.
Right.
And so I think Hareton still is just because Linton died.
Right.
And because he also married his cousin.
Be like the next.
So both possible heirs are married now. So I think at that point it's just like Hareton's by default. Because women aren't allowed their own property.
No. Even though Edgar put Isabella in his will. And that's how he got Thrushcross Grange, which was interesting. Yep. But that was a special instance.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so he, Heathcliff sees Hareton as his son, his like real son. It's interesting. I thought Isabella was really kind of cool, actually.
Yeah.
Like the way in which we got to see like a female perspective of abuse, which was cool. And the way she like stood up like for herself. I kind of admired her a lot.
I felt bad because like the obvious she gets pulled into Cathy and Heathcliff's games just by the like the simple fact that she's Edgar's sister. It could have been any other pair of siblings in their county.
Yeah.
But because it was them, she's the one who gets stuck with the shithole that is Wuthering Heights, as like Hindley and Heathcliff are having their like pissing contests, basically. But there was still a part of me, because like I'm gonna keep bringing in some of the Austen stuff because it does feel like a dark Austen novel. You know, in Pride and Prejudice, I can't remember the sister's name, but the sister who like runs off with the soldier.
Lydia or Kitty. I think it's Kitty.
Yeah, I think it's Kitty. Who runs off, and then the soldier is like trying to do a ransom, and then instead has to marry her. And he kind of loses that one because she's like the worst. But and I'm not like, I want to clarify, I'm not like blaming Isabella for what happened to her, but like when it first all happened, I was like, girl, you're dumb.
Well, you could definitely, like, at least the film adaptation kind of takes a little liberty, because we don't really get a lot of her like falling in love with Heathcliff, but it's like you can tell, oh, this like dark, handsome, rich guy just kind of strolls into town, and like we said, like this is like such a small community that like any new blood, you're like, ooh, like otherwise who's she gonna marry? Hindley? Like you know.
Well, we don't get a lot of her point of view, which is also
only with,
interesting.
like the abuse inside of Wuthering Heights, actually.
Yeah.
She's actually one of the few people we do get a point of view, but it's not really about like much else.
Yeah. But like with the falling in love, because it seems to be obvious to everyone else that Heathcliff and Cathy are like intertwined.
Yeah.
In some way. And so it's, I hate to say it, but like I also pity her because she didn't see that. And that's gotta be rough.
Cathy tried to tell her.
Yeah.
Cathy was like, he's Wolf. Like, don't try. But she was just like insistent.
That sounds like a challenge too.
I know.
To like a teenager.
That
doesn't sound like a no. That sounds like a I can fix him. Like
yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Where to next?
Am I running the show?
Yeah, this is your favorite book.
I know. The other scene would be Cathy's madness. When Edgar and Heathcliff have a row and she makes herself sick.
Yeah.
And this is like, okay. But she descends to this point of madness where she can't recognize herself. And she has, and I think this is where they become 4 different people, right?
Yeah.
I would say there's like a duology in them, because she's no longer the child. There's definitely this like emphasis on hearkening back to childhood with Heathcliff, where now she's like, she doesn't recognize herself. And there's that, that really overused quote, I wish I were a girl again, half savage, hardy, and free. And she's like, now I cry at like the slightest like thing, like, why am I so changed? Because you married Linton.
Yeah.
You
also because you're pregnant.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then when Heathcliff comes and sees her before she dies, the fact that he doesn't even recognize her pregnancy is definitely an indication that he always sees her kind of in that child's like they're always kind of going back to that, like doesn't even see her as like a woman. And there's even a part she says that you're not my Heathcliff, like because he's sitting there like saying, why did you do this? And then she's like, I want the other Heathcliff, where's he? Like
yeah
and it's just like, yeah, it's just crazy. And she does that too, where she like when she looks out into the moors and imagines Wuthering the Heights, and she kind of has this like episode or reverie, and asks, I just love that part's so cool, where she literally asks him to come, like, will you venture, you always followed me. And she says he's considering, like they're like talking. There's definitely like, I like to think this book, and this is where this is where it becomes a little less gothic and a little bit more romantic, in the sense that there is this kind of spiritual, I wouldn't say supernatural, because even supernatural implies an order of sorts, but this spiritual aspect of it that exists like in a vacuum, right? Like between Cathy and Heathcliff, that I almost want to believe that he was answering her, like like...
Well, it also like it mirrors the scene when Lockwood has his nightmare, and then after he leaves the room and Heathcliff is yelling out the window for her.
Yeah,
like it almost felt like that was the call and response, those two events. Because it's another time when he's like begging her to haunt him.
Yeah.
Not just like his like a specter of his mind, but like her specifically, like her actual ghost. He's like, he wants her there.
Yeah.
He's like jealous that Lockwood got it.
Yeah. Yeah. He's like, I've been summoning her for years.
Yeah, he's like, where the fuck was she when I was calling? You didn't even ask for her.
Yeah.
The scene, so the scene when he shows up, I do agree with that, like that duology between them, within them, and like of them, is that like it's almost that they're allowing their poor behavior because they like themselves have split. Like they seem almost like, not just when she's in her madness and she's asking for like the other Heathcliff, but just generally. Oh, hiccup. Sorry. They seem like genuinely conscious of this split. And so they don't have to act respectfully because this other one of them is, which, bringing it back to the private and the public again, briefly, is that you could argue that they've got like, so like she's got the childlike version of herself that he sees, and the other Heathcliff that she wants to see, but these other ones are their public faces. Because that's how she got Edgar to fall in love with her. She plays this very like docile, childlike woman. He proposes even after she has an outlash, because she donned that happy childlike face again and convinced him that it wasn't the real thing. This is real.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just like this kind of underlying implication that Bronte has throughout as well. Because Nellie is also like, again, we're getting this mostly or like all from Nellie's retelling. And as a servant, she is hyper aware of the private and the public.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so she, even as she's telling like relatively decent exchanges between them and other people, she's adding the I didn't particularly like him at this point
Mm-hmm.
because of X, Y, and Z, which are private things, which are things that they're letting themselves reveal to one another. That's why I think they see themselves as kind of like fused souls, fused beings, because their version of the private, where they're like real people, is so ingrained as like each other. Because they developed those like private personalities.
Yeah, like that childhood when they would be out in the moors together, just on their own. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that's another reason why it's like that codependency is because like their identity was shaped as one. It wasn't just shaped like side by side, like siblings normally. Like Hindley doesn't have this problem because he wasn't shaping his identity with another person. That like that lack of boundaries.
Well, and it is kind of interesting because you have like the Heathcliff is the other.
Mm-hmm.
And then Catherine is this woman who's not going to inherit.
Yeah.
They're both kind of lost. And they definitely, find each other and develop like their identities in this almost kind of mystical space, almost like where they spend hours and they don't come back till late, just spending in the moors together. And that we don't see, actually, which is interesting. And so when they come back, we just see the effects of decision making. That Nellie gets to glean.
She's like, I don't know, they conspire for several hours a day, and then they come home and
then they do stupid shit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Again, it's one of those things where it's like, as much as you can like firmly realize how bad it is, you still can't help but be kind of like jealous of that connection.
Yes.
Which probably doesn't seem that healthy, but like that's what you're like that's what you're supposed to feel, that question about whether or not it's good or bad.
Yeah. And there's this, it seems to be there's this theme of, is this right or wrong?
Yeah.
She asked Nellie, was this right to do?
Yeah.
And Heathcliff, there's that scene in the kitchen with
which one?
There's that scene in the kitchen with Isabella, and they're talking about, I can't remember exactly what's going on, but there's this conversation about if the havoc that Heathcliff will wreak on his enemies. She has no problem with what he's doing. She will feel sympathy for the people being wronged. Like she'll be like, that's wrong, but not, but anything Heathcliff does is right.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's really interesting. Unless it's done to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's definitely like that theme of like right and wrong. And like, cause it's based off of necessity, right? She even says that. And so, there's not much room for interpretation about where their like souls loyalties lie, regardless of their actions. Like we all know like the crux of like what's going on here is that they need to be together.
Yeah.
And that's right. And so yeah, this idea of like what's good or bad is very complicated for us, the reader, because it's based off of this non-exist this place that doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of this like far-reaching, insurmountable like place to have someone's soul fused to you,
Yeah.
which is romantic in jest, but it's not actually like applicable to like
Yeah.
us, right? So it's definitely romanticized. I found it to be like it's such an extreme book. Like
Mhm. Every
and
element of it is extreme, though.
exactly.
The relationships, the weather, the responses that Lockwood is having. Sorry, I had a bunch of cheese before this. um, like from top to bottom, the book is extreme. I do, however, think we could briefly look at Cathy from a Wollstonecraft point of view. Since we did
Wow.
have an episode on Wollstonecraft, as much as Cathy is not presented as a likable character, and I don't think she's supposed to be at all, like I think she's written exactly how it's intended.
Mm-hmm.
Wollstonecraft, and so we did talk about this in the Wollstonecraft episode. One of the biggest qualms that Wollstonecraft has with the treatment of women is that they are not given the choices, like proper choices in life, genuine proper choices, number of choices in life, in order to like choose their own path. And so, like you keep saying, this necessity that they talk about. Yes, I don't agree with Cathy marrying Edgar, but I also understand that it was for somebody who comes from like a family of her standing, a necessary marriage.
Mm.
She had to have a home. She had to have food, a husband who could provide for her. She doesn't have any actual skills because she's been generally lazy. She goes out into the moors all day and spends hours with Heathcliff. Like they don't do anything. Um, and so while I would say that like Cathy is a good example of why you have to provide women with more options. Because as she keeps making these choices, and like as readers who are expecting a romance or who like our brains are kind of seeing a romance and getting angry when it doesn't happen, I wouldn't even say that she's often given like the right choice in life. It's very rarely an option for her.
Mm-hmm.
And so she is like wholeheartedly a product of her environment and of her circumstances. And those circumstances have allowed her to become this very, very kind of vile person. And it's
Yeah.
not entirely her fault. Like if she's given two shit options, you got to go with the less smelly shit. And it just kind of seems to be that over and over again until like I said, until she's just this kind of vile person.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think even Bronte's like playing with that a little bit of almost in kind of a inverted way of she wants to be the most powerful, like Nellie asks her like why Linton, like why did you say yes, like why do you love him, how do you love him,
Mhm.
um and she says I'll be the most powerful woman of the neighborhood. And
Yeah.
it's like this is what choice is. That's
Yep.
the ultimate path, right?
Yep.
But there's something just like keeping her from feeling that it's right, right? Like, and that's Nellie says, what's the obstacle? And she says, here and here. Like, I can't, like, every part of me tells me that it's wrong. And so
And like
that's,
because it is,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. Yeah.
Like, she's right. Like, and that's kind of what I mean is she shouldn't have had to have chosen just for power, but she's choosing for power because she also, on some level that we don't get to see because it's from Nellie's point of view and she's dead by this point, she recognizes that she has a severe lack of power. And it's probably been reinforced by like Hindley's treatment of them.
Yes.
And his wife's like crooning. She gets back from the 5 weeks at Thrush, was it?
Thrushcross Grange.
Thank you. That was one of the ones, you know, when you like
Thrushcross Grange. Like I want to say Thrushcross.
I think it is Thrushcross.
Okay, Thrushcross Grange.
It was one of the ones that like I just kind of, as I would read every time, my brain would like, go Thrush
Grange. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel ya.
And it, because even in my head, it's a bit of a tongue twister. It's bad. So she gets back from those 5 weeks, and immediately, because they've been like conspiring on how to keep Heathcliff and her apart, and so the best way that they decide is for Hindley's wife, whose name I cannot remember, to like
Francis,
spoil her.
Yeah.
For as long as possible to keep them apart, which is also kind of like undermining her agency in one, like keeping her away from Heathcliff, like trying to manipulate her into these new things, into this new like lifestyle, but also that the Wollstonecraft quote when she says, "Forgive me, fellow women, if I decide not to treat you like an idiot."
Yeah.
And I don't remember the actual wording. It's much more graceful the way she says.
Essentially that, yeah.
It's essentially that, where she's like, "I'm not going to talk down to you. I'm not going to belittle you. I'm not gonna treat you like a child." And that's what Hindley's wife does.
Yeah.
And so she is, again, like kind of in an invert, like she's showing the like what not to do version of this.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I keep pulling blanks because it's almost
no, you're good.
It reminds me of like the Wollstonecraft episode where I'm like, there's so much, and I don't know where any of it is in my head because there's just so much going on.
Yeah.
So I love that we like didn't really talk. I mean, I don't know. I think it's interesting that we didn't talk about Heathcliff a lot. I actually didn't write a lot of notes about him because I was like, everyone knows his story, you know?
The main notes that I wrote about him are mostly the way that Nellie presents him at first. When she like doesn't like him, when he's this interloper that she is trying to like have bad feelings for. Because a lot of her language, and the thing is, like, it's not even necessarily about Heathcliff, the stuff that I wrote about Heathcliff. It's just like the way Nellie talks about Heathcliff really shows the like weight of decorum. I don't even know if that's the right word, but kind of like manners, expectations, loosely tied to, like you were saying, like this right and wrong. Because there is one line where she talks about how their father slowly started to trust Heathcliff more. And she's like, he wouldn't even trust his own son. And then in like parentheses, she's like, to be fair, I guess Heathcliff was honest most of the time. But she says it as though like that's not reason enough to trust Heathcliff. He should still trust his own son over Heathcliff, even though his son is the one that's lying.
Yeah.
And so this kind of like expectation of Heathcliff being less than. Just
it's
because
like, it's kind of assumed. Like he's just like this outsider. And so no one's
so he should be treated
him.
Worse.
Yeah.
I
would say decorum is a good word for that.
Yeah. Like just kind of like the expectations of like relations within the house was really odd when Heathcliff first shows up, because of expecting him to be treated like shit. And then getting like super angry when he's not.
Yeah. And then I think it kind of works too that when Heathcliff takes Hareton as his own, you know, because Mr. Earnshaw like showed him that like you can take other blood as your own.
Yeah,
I think it's cool. Cool.
Until he like starts acting as revenge still,
Yeah.
but like he eventually gives up on that, and he's happy for them falling in love or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
But okay, so the reason that was something that I wrote notes on kind of outside of Heathcliff as well is because the very beginning, I forgot how like annoying Lockwood was at first.
Yeah.
I think his first line is like, a perfect misanthrope's heaven, and Mr. Heathcliff and I are such a suitable pair to divide the desolation between us. I'm like, no, not how that works.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And the night that he gets stuck at Wuthering Heights, he gets stuck there because he had told Heathcliff he was going to come back, even though Heathcliff continually said, please don't. He was like, he told me not to. Yeah.
He's not listening to like the warnings. They're like, what? You're just gonna like, you just walked here? Like,
yeah, he's like, do you not see the weather outside? Good fucking luck finding your way back.
You can tell like they don't take kindly to like
yeah
outsiders. They're like, get the fuck out of here.
Yeah. And he doesn't see that they don't trust him because he's an outsider. And he thinks that like he has to do this because it's his word. And he's like, I promise I'd come back.
Yeah.
And then like the people around him, well, like when he's at Wuthering Heights, like the dogs attack him. Catherine is kind of acting like a bitch, which is fair because he waltzes into your house, like the sun's already going down. There's a storm outside that's brewing. He's gonna get stuck here, and Heathcliff is probably gonna take it out on her in some way. Hareton's just like glaring at him from the corner of the room, which I love that image as well, like this little like mini brooder. But he just thinks that they're gonna automatically have a room set up for him. He thinks that, oh, well, you can just spare like one of your servants to take me. He's like, I can't do that. Why would you think I could do that? And so this kind of like interplay of like expectations from other people, like manner expectations, was really fun.
Yeah.
Mostly because like Lockwood gets the shit end of that one.
Yeah. Like there's definitely like the whole Yorkshire like southerner like aspect of it, but even us who may like not know like the implications of that can tell like he's not from around there, like, and like if anything it's the house, like it's the house itself, and which
is like a character
we soon to become known why is like the way that it is. And
I don't know about your copy, but mine, every time Joseph spoke, had to have a footnote
interpretation. Oh, cool. That's good.
Does yours have those?
No.
Oh God, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I don't know what he says half the time.
The first few times I tried to read what he was saying, like I tried to read his words, and then I was like, I can't do this. Yeah. And every time after that, I was like, no, I gotta go underneath.
So what's interesting is, when Emily got this published, yours is probably too. There's two versions of this book.
Yeah.
The second one is heavily edited by her sister Charlotte after Emily died. Of course, now like modern scholars are like usually go for like the first edition because it's the original. The manuscript no longer exists. She burned it or something. It's weird. Yeah, shitty. I mean, both her sisters died and she was grieving. So, but she writes this letter to the ether, the publisher, you know, the literary world, that because Wuthering Heights got like such a shitty reception. I won't say that it didn't get an entirely shitty reception, but it was definitely
not the best,
understood the way that it is now. It wasn't until about the 20th century that it became actually like, oh wow, this is like actually a masterpiece. And Charlotte kind of threw Emily under the bus a little bit, saying like, oh, like we weren't very educated and we're from this like remote place and we just like, yeah, it just kind of shitty. And that was one of the things she edited was like Joseph's language. But I'm kind of glad that they kept it because I'm glad it is the way that it is because it's supposed to be like that, you know, like it was supposed to kind of have this you know,
well, it's in character,
foreign, almost Yorkshire like you know, where everyone in the room could understand him but you.
I did just look it up. So I've got the 1940s or the 1847 version. So I've got I've got Emily's actual version.
Yeah. She said a lot of people were disturbed by Heathcliff, like who could write a character like that. And so she was trying to save like her reputation, essentially, which you can't like shun her for that. But still, like now when you're like looking at it like we are as like, oh my gosh, it's like such an amazing like crazy story for someone to like undermine, but I think the intention was good. But yeah, I love the story of the three Brontes because they didn't live quite remote. They lived pretty remote, but they still like had the train come through, like, and they traveled a little bit and they were educated. Their father was from Ireland, was super poor, and was able to like rise kind of to become like a curate. And so it was, they had like 9 children and like half of them died. Their mother died when she was like really young, like 6 or something, I can't remember. So there was just a lot of death in their family. And actually that they died, Emily and Anne died of the same thing, which was like consumption or TB, because the water came down from the mountain through the graves. And that's why everyone died.
That sounds about right.
But Branwell was the only boy, and he got to go to school and he got to, you know, become really highly educated, and was an artist, a novelist, all of these things. But he became an alcoholic and died of alcoholism. And so Anne's book, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, is actually like a really interesting book about alcoholism. It has like alcoholism in it. But they started writing because they needed to make money because their father was going blind. And so it was crazy. But anyways, they published anonymously under pen names. Charlotte was the most ambitious. She's the one that like, but what I love about Emily was that she wasn't ambitious. And in fact, we can credit Charlotte a lot for the fact that we have Wuthering Heights in our hands right now, because she really didn't want to be published. She definitely didn't want her poetry to be published, but she like convinced her to. So like she was a very private person, and she was a very domestic person. She loved to be in the like kitchen. She loved to be in the house. She had a really visceral relationship with her dog. They would go on long hikes on the moors. Like she was just like this really like cool homebody that had like this like wild imagination. And she's probably one of my favorite poets just because she just has like such a strong language, like sense of language, kind of along the same lines as like Mary Wollstonecraft, like those like really like intense. Yeah. So I just really like her.
I support
and
it.
I'm glad that we have Wuthering Heights. It's a kind of a sad story, but
It is.
Her death.
It's not. So I love that she ends on the technical high note of like Harriton and Catherine falling in love. Because it almost feels like, on the one hand, this redemption of Heathcliff and Cathy's love.
Yes. Because
the issue wasn't that, like, I mean, the issue was kind of like, the issue wasn't entirely that they were bad for each other. It was that they couldn't find a way to make it work because society wouldn't let them, until it was too late and they couldn't do it anymore because they were both married. They both like built these separate kind of like fuck you lives with each other. Like that's the way their relationships were and felt.
Yeah.
But it's almost that like we talked about, like, Heathcliff loses some of his fire. He loses some of that like life force as the drive for revenge leaves him. But at the same time that that's happening is like Harriton and Catherine are falling in love. So it's not just that the drive for revenge is leaving him, but that he's like seeing
it's getting replaced.
Yeah, exactly.
It's getting driven out. Yeah.
Yes, it's getting driven out by love. And so even though it's like sad because we never get the release of him and Cathy actually being together in life, like spending a life together, we still get the positive of Harriton and Cathy hopefully building something better.
Yes. Yeah, it's like it's a happy ending.
Yeah, oddly.
Yeah, whereas like I'm like comparing it to Frankenstein is silly, but I don't know about other Gothic novels, but you know, like horror.
Not many of them end on a good note.
Yeah, like the whole point of horror is that it's kind of like this like loop, right? Like
yeah,
the demon is still there. It didn't go anywhere. Nothing got extinguished. Like
yeah, even if like they defeat it, it's like, okay, so it'll come back in 100 years. What happens in 100 years?
Yeah, it's like
years?
The Darkling. You're like, God.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Just another Gothic element of King of Scars, the Bardugo, that whole what is it? The Grisha-verse. Yes. But yeah, it does end on an oddly positive note, which I love.
Yeah.
Because it also it's positive, but it doesn't feel cathartic.
No, it doesn't feel sappy. In fact, it just feels real.
Well, cathartic, like, I mean, like it doesn't feel complete. Like it doesn't feel like a completion. It still leaves you wanting more. It still leaves like an open-ended kind of question. Yeah. Of like Heathcliff and Catherine. Because like you even get the like people talk about seeing his ghost side by side with another in the moors, which is possible because that's the spiritual, like you were saying, that spiritual element that's present at Wuthering Heights. Yeah. So it's still this specter that the world just moves on, though. Yes.
Wuthering Heights moves on.
Yeah.
It was just a dark moment.
Yeah. Weirdly.
And it's weird because it does start when Heathcliff enters. It's almost like he brought it.
Yeah, because he's the other. Yeah. He's that other.
But Cathy caused it, right? Like
like
Cathy.
Expectations of women in a patriarchal society caused Cathy to cause it. Yeah. No, it was good. It was good. It was also nice to talk about it. This is one of the things I've loved about going over some of these classics, is like just talking about it with a friend and not with like a class and trying to be like the smartest person in the room.
Yes. I kind of followed suit with this book and obsessed over it a bit, because I can't help it.
That's fine. That's fair.
I listened to like a couple podcasts. I like watched the movie.
I think you watched it twice.
So excited. You what?
Didn't you watch it like twice?
No. I just watched it once.
Okay.
I was going to watch it that night and then something happened and then I watched it the next night or something. But
Got you. Okay.
Yeah. In fact, that's actually how I fell in love with the story. I read the book first kind of person in this instance, unfortunately.
That's fair.
Sorry, but my dad and I have like this huge like bonding moment, and I was like chatting with him on Messenger about it, about how we love the 1992 version where Ralph Fiennes plays Heathcliff. So before he was Voldemort, he was Heathcliff for me, which fits.
Yeah.
It made it work fine. But he was also in like, that was like the height of his like attractiveness. I wouldn't say he's like a heartthrob, but they definitely played that card in this Wuthering Heights film, because there's like the Fabio entrance where his hair's like long and his like big billowing shirt's like open.
Oh,
it's just like, okay. Okay, buddy. Like they were definitely trying to make him like, I mean, yeah.
They were leaning into what we all want from Heathcliff.
Yes, exactly. And that's why this time around when I watched the film, I was very much like, there's like a lot of like, I haven't seen the 1940s like classic film version, which is what everyone kind of builds off of this, because that's kind of what made it a pop culture like story of like, you know, the ripping bodice or whatever, like idea of romance that that pop culture has implied about this story.
It's like what influenced all of like our mom's romance pocketbooks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so you can I could definitely see where I was like, well, this wasn't really like what I thought of it when I read it. Like it was just definitely like, you could tell they were like taking
romantic
from that
liberties.
But,
romantic sorry, I was just, for my own input, Googling, I wanted to double check the title of the movie. My first Ralph Fiennes was Made in Manhattan. Which
cute.
is the rom-com with Jennifer Lopez, yes, which is, I would say, still a good movie. I think I watched it within like the last year. That was my first
long time.
Yeah.
I built a real strong relationship with the movie before.
I firmly believe that.
Yeah.
I would argue as well that the best way to experience 1800s, so 19th century literature is through the movies first.
Yeah.
Because like a good Emma film or like a good Jane Austen generally, so good. And sometimes it is nicer to ease in through, because a lot of the movies don't go that far off from the books when it comes to these books, to these stories. Except for honestly, Frankenstein. Frankenstein, I will say, is the exception. But like, even then
Frankenstein's pretty straightforward. Like, it doesn't have a lot of like fluff to it.
Yeah.
Which is hard because neither does Jane Austen. Like, Jane Austen is very well edited, I would say, but like, it's the experience of reading a 19th century novel is not going to have the same effect as a 19th century person reading it, right? Like, you know, this is what YA was for them. Like,
exactly.
Like, people were like, what are you reading? You know, and it was like,
and it's all the girls
our classic
like gathered around. Yeah. They're just gathered around like the fireplace reading the manuscript.
Yeah.
Giggling at all the same points. Like,
So I agree. Like, I think watching it, getting to know like the characters a little bit and like the general plot, and then reading it to glean more is like is a good experience. I would argue that.
Have you ever seen, oh God, what is it called? I'm gonna have to Google it real quick. So basically, I'll give the quick synopsis while I'm Googling it. It's about this woman who, is this it? No. Oh no, and I can't remember the actress's name. Okay, so it's about this woman who like wins a contest and she's like obsessed with Jane Austen, and her friend tells her to go to this retreat because it's a Jane Austen, like you go, you live in a big mansion, they give you all the outfits, they give you characters, you're basically like cosplaying for like the week or weekend or whatever, however long you're staying. um and her friend tells her to go because she's like, you've been single for so long, you've got such high expectations, this is all because you read all of these romance books and you can't get out of your head about it. Austenland, there we go. um and I feel like that movie really kind of summed up this experience of like, you want to, so she goes and there's other women who are also acting, like they're paying for this experience as well, and there's actors who are there and they're playing around. And it's like, you want to experience that with friends, so like you want to watch the movie, you want to like have those memories.
Yeah, it's like Pride and Prejudice, the movie.
Yeah,
I don't know how many times I've watched that at a sleepover.
exactly. And everyone
Like,
giggles.
Everyone's like,
when
oh,
like,
their hand
Mr.
touched.
Darcy. Yes, yeah. And he's like, his like hand does the thing, like, oh god, the shivers. Yeah, exactly. Like there's so much about this that reading this as a classic you don't get, because not that like you can't conceptualize, but like you don't get that same kind of group experience, that same kind of like, everyone's reading this because there aren't 50 million books in the world. Everyone in your neighborhood is reading this together, and you're all talking about it because you go to church on Sundays and you're sure as hell not going to talk about the fact that there's less men on the market now, because that's depressing.
We're all going
to talk about the letters.
Find Mr. Darcy. The letters. All right, well, last thoughts.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, it's last thoughts is that this time around I appreciated Heathcliff more than I did last time. I think I saw a little bit more about why he was as shitty as he was. And I feel for him. Yeah. And I see Cathy in a new light now. I used to just like errantly hate her. Yeah. But I feel bad for her too, because she was very much a product of her circumstances.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I definitely saw a little bit more the what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, here comes Bunny. The gravity of having a perspective from Nellie. Yeah. I really felt that a lot more. I paid a lot more attention to it. In fact, I think I'm going to write a blog about it.
Yes. Nice.
And like, if she was a character in the story that had a little bit more, like, she'd just be my favorite. She's my favorite character, but I don't know. It's difficult for me to say that because she doesn't really have a lot of agency. Like, she doesn't participate quite a lot, but yeah, like I enjoyed I paid more attention to kind of like the sequence of events, just because like I've read these passages and these scenes, like, so, like I'll just go through and read the scene, like I said.
No, that's
like
fair.
I've like almost memorized them sometimes, but like kind of seeing the sequence and like the crescendo, or like the building of like what's happening a little bit clearer. I do agree, like I understand where Heathcliff's coming from, and you've kind of helped me understand like Yeah, Cathy was kind of put there though. Like,
yeah, like I'm not defending
because like
her actions.
Because I kind of welcome that idea of like,
Yeah.
I don't want to hate her. Like,
Yeah.
And so I think from like what a 21st century idea of like what we know of that time. Yeah, she was definitely put in that situation. So yeah.
Yeah.
I loved it, and I'm so glad I got to talk about it as well.
Yeah, I'm glad that we got to share another one of our favorites.
I know. So, if you haven't already yet, go watch the 1992 version.
Yes.
It has a epic soundtrack. Some of the best music ever written.
Also,
I wish they had it on Spotify. It also has Ralph Fiennes, and Juliette Binoche plays Cathy, and she's so good. And even the gal that plays Nellie. Anyways.
Okay.
If you want to learn more about the Brontes, also watch To Walk Invisible. It's a PBS masterpiece.
Yes.
And it's actually incredible because it's incredible. It's very historically accurate, and it's fairly new. If you want to know about their lives, which is really fascinating. So what are we reading next week, Melissa?
Nothing. Next week is our end of season. So
it's our end of season.
Yeah.
I can't believe it. It's already gone. It's coming.
Next week we're once again gonna get drunk.
Yes.
And talk about the last 11 episodes.
Yeah, we'll probably do something similar, like tops.
Our top tops and our top bottoms. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. Well,
can't wait.
Can't wait until next week. What?
In the meantime, however,
yes,
we have a book club that we're starting.
Yes, in like a couple of days, a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Our first meeting is going to be the end of this month.
Yes, January 29th.
Yep.
You can go to our website or Instagram and sign up, and we'll send you the Discord link. We're going to be reading A Court of Thorns and Roses series, and we've stretched it out in a really comfortable reading schedule for the whole year. So just come in, chime in if you want to talk about fairy smut. So
I know I do.
I'm so excited. You have no idea. I'm like, as much as I loved Wuthering Heights, I'm like, oh yes.
You need some more explicit
What's my next
content.
read? What's my next read? Crescent City. That's right. I'm
so
excited.
That's gonna start us off for next season.
Mm-hmm.
Shh, don't tell anyone.
Don't tell anyone. We're gonna be Matt Moss bitches soon. SJMs.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Until next time.
Until next week. Happy reading.
Happy reading. Bye.
Bye. God. I'm not that drunk. I'm just like so